So anyway, they're having their annual Pioneer Days, just like in Castle Rock. Yeah, Pioneer Days. That's a fucking blast, Vern said earnestly. I put my whole family in that jail on wheels they have, even fucking Billy. It was only for half an hour, and it cost me my whole allowance, but it was worth it just to know where the son of a whore was. Will you shut up and let him tell it? Teddy hollered. Vern blinked. Sure, yeah, okay. Go on, Gordy, Chris said. It's not really much. Nah, we don't expect much from a wet end like you, Teddy said. But tell it anyway. I cleared my throat. So anyway, it's Pioneer Days, and on the last night they have these 3 big events. There's an egg roll for the little kids, and a sack race for kids that are like 8 or 9, and then there's the pie-eating contest. And the main guy of the story is this fat kid nobody likes named Davy Hogan. Like Charlie Hogan's brother, if he had one, Vern said, and then shrank back as Chris rabbit-punched him again. This kid, he's our age, but he's fat. He weighs like 180, and he's always getting beat up and ranked out. And all the kids, instead of calling him Davy, they call him Lardass Hogan and rank him out whenever they get the chance. They nodded respectfully, showing the proper sympathy for Lardass. Although if such a guy ever showed up in Castle Rock, we all would have been out teasing him and ranking him to the dogs and back. So he decided to take revenge, because he's, like, fed up, you know? He's only in the pie-eating contest, but that's like the final event during Pioneer Days, and everyone really digs it. The prize is $5. So he wins it and gives the finger to everybody, Teddy said. Boss! No, it's better than that, Chris said. Just shut up and listen. Lardass figures to himself, $5, what's that? If anybody remembers anything at all in 2 weeks, it'll just be that fucking pig Hogan out-ate everybody. Well, it figures. Let's go over his house and rank the shit out of him. Only now we'll call him Pie-ass instead of Lardass. They nodded some more, agreeing that Davy Hogan was a thinking cat. I began to warm to my own story. But everybody expects him to enter the contest, you know, even his mom and dad. Hey, they practically got that $5 spent for him already. Yeah, right, Chris said. So he's thinking about it and hating the whole thing, because being fat isn't really his fault, see? He'd got these weird fucking glands, something, and... My cousin's like that, Vern said excitedly. Sincerely, she weighs close to 300 pounds. Supposed to be her hypoid gland or something like that. I don't know about her hypoid gland, but what a fucking blimp. No shit. She looks like a fucking Thanksgiving turkey. And this one time... Will you shut the fuck up, Vern? Chris cried violently. For the last time, honest to God. He had finished his Coke, and now he turned the hourglass-shaped green bottle upside down and brandished it over Vern's head. Yeah, right, I'm sorry. Go on, Gordy. It's a swell story. I smiled. I didn't really mind Vern's interruptions, but of course I couldn't tell Chris that. He was the self-appointed guardian of art. So he's turning it over in his mind, you know, the whole week before the contest. At school, kids keep coming up to him and saying, Hey, Lardass, how many pies you gonna eat? You gonna eat 10, 20, fucking 80? And Lardass, he says, How should I know? I don't even know what kind they are. And see, there's quite a bit of interest in the contest because the champ is this grown-up whose name is, Bill Trainer, I guess. And this guy, Trainer, he ain't even fat. In fact, he's a real string bean. But he can eat pies like a whiz, and the year before he ate 6 pies in 5 minutes. Whole pies? Teddy asked, awestruck. Right you are. And Lardass, he's the youngest guy to ever be in the contest. Go, Lardass! Teddy cried excitedly. Scoff up those fucking pies! Tell him about the other guys in it, Chris said. Okay, besides Lardass Hogan and Bill Trainer, there was Calvin Spire, the fattest guy in town. He ran the jewelry store. Gretna Jewels, Vern said, and snickered. Chris gave him a black look. And then there's this guy who's a disc jockey at a radio station up in Lewiston. He ain't exactly fat, but he's sort of chubby, you know. And the last guy was Hubert Gretna III. who was the principal of Lardass Hogan's school." "He was eating against his own principal?" Teddy asked. Chris clutched his knees and rocked back and forth joyfully. "Ain't that great? Go on, Gordy." I had them now. They were all leaning forward. I felt an intoxicating sense of power. I tossed my empty Coke bottle into the woods and scrunched around a little bit to get comfortable. I remember hearing the chickadee again, off in the woods, farther away now, lifting its monotonous, endless call into the sky. "Dee-dee-dee-dee." "So he gets this idea," I said. "The greatest revenge idea a kid ever had. The big night comes, the end of Pioneer Days. The pie-eating contest comes just before the fireworks. The main street of Gretna has been closed off so people can walk around in it, and there's this big platform set up right in the street. There's bunting hanging down and a big crowd in front. There's also a photographer from the paper to get a picture of the winner with blueberries all over his face, because it turned out to be blueberry pies that year. Also, I almost forgot to tell you this, they had to eat the pies with their hands tied behind their backs. So, dig it, they come up onto the platform." Chapter 16. From The Revenge of Lardass Hogan by Gordon LaChance, originally published in Cavalier Magazine, March 1975. Used by permission. They came up onto the platform one by one and stood behind a long trestle table covered with a linen cloth. The table was stacked high with pies and stood at the edge of the platform. Above it were looped necklaces of bare 100-watt bulbs, moths and night flyers banging softly against them and haloing them. Above the platform, bathed in spotlights, was a long sign which read, "The Great Gretna Pie Eat of 1960. To either side of this sign hung battered loudspeakers supplied by Chuck Day of the Great Day Appliance Shop. Bill Davis, the reigning champion, was Chuck's cousin. As each contestant came up, his hands bound behind him and his shirt front open, like Sidney Carton on his way to the guillotine, Mayor Charbonneau would announce his name over Chuck's PA system and tie a large white bib around his neck. Calvin Spire received token applause only. In spite of his belly, which was the size of a 20-gallon water barrel, he was considered an underdog, second only to the Hogan Kid. Most considered Lardass a comer, but too young and inexperienced to do much this year. After Spire, Bob Cormier was introduced. Cormier was a disc jockey who did a popular afternoon program at WLAM in Lewiston. He got a bigger hand, accompanied by a few screams from the teenage girls in the audience. The girls thought he was cute. John Wiggins, principal of Gretna Elementary School, followed Cormier. He received a hearty cheer from the older section of the audience and a few scattered boos from fractious members of his student body. Wiggins managed to beam paternally and frown sternly down on the audience at the same time. Next, Mayor Charbonneau introduced Lardass. "A new participant in the annual Great Gretna Pie Eat, but one we expect great things from in the future. Young Master David Hogan." Lardass got a big round of applause as Mayor Charbonneau tied on his bib, and as it was dying away, a rehearsed Greek chorus just beyond the reach of the 100-watt bulbs cried out in wicked unison, "Go get 'em, Lardass!" There were muffled shrieks of laughter, running footsteps, a few shadows that no one could or would identify, some nervous laughter, some judicial frowns, the largest from Hizener Charbonneau, the most visible figure of authority. Lardass himself appeared to not even notice. The small smile, greasing his thick lips and creasing his thick chops, did not change as the mayor, still frowning largely, tied his bib around his neck and told him not to pay any attention to fools in the audience. As if the mayor had even the faintest inkling of what monstrous fools Lardass Hogan had suffered and would continue to suffer as he rumbled through life like a Nazi tiger tank. The mayor's breath was warm and smelled of beer. The last contestant to mount the bunting-decorated stage drew the loudest and most sustained applause. This was the legendary Bill Travis, 6 feet 5 inches tall, gangling, voracious. Travis was a mechanic at the local Amoco station down by the rail yard, a likable fellow if there ever was one. It was common knowledge around town that there was more involved in the Great Gretna Pie Eat than a mere $5. At least for Bill Travis there was. There were two reasons for this. First, people always came by the station to congratulate Bill after he won the contest, and most everyone who came to congratulate stayed to get his gas tank filled. And the two garage bays were sometimes booked up for a solid month after the contest. Folks would come in to get a muffler replaced or their wheel bearings greased and would sit down in the theater chairs ranged along one wall. Jerry Malling, who owned the Amoco, had salvaged them from the old Gem Theater when it was torn down in 1957. Drinking Cokes and Moxies from out of the machine and gassing with Bill about the contest as he changed spark plugs or rolled around on a crawly wheelie under someone's International Harvester pickup, looking for holes in the exhaust system. Bill always seemed willing to talk, which was one of the reasons he was so well liked in Gretna. There was some dispute around town as to whether Jerry Malling gave Bill a flat bonus for the extra business his yearly feat, or yearly eat, if you prefer, brought in, or if he got an out-and-out raise. Whatever way it was, there could be no doubt that Travis did much better than most small-town wrench jockeys. He had a nice-looking two-story ranch out on the Sabattis Road, and certain snide people referred to it as the house the Pies built. That was probably an exaggeration, but Bill had it coming another way, which brings us to the second reason there was more in it for Travis than just $5. The Pie Eat was a hot wagering event in Gretna. Perhaps most people only came to laugh, but a goodly minority also came to lay their money down. Contestants were observed and discussed by these bettors as ardently as thoroughbreds are observed and discussed by racing touts. The wagerers accosted contestants' friends, relatives, even mere acquaintances. They pried out any and all details concerning the contestants' eating habits. There was always a lot of discussion about that year's official pie. Apple was considered a heavy pie, apricot a light one, although a contestant had to resign himself to a day or two of the trots after downing 3 or 4 apricot pies. That year's official pie, blueberry, was considered a happy medium. Bettors, of course, were particularly interested in their man's stomach for blueberry pies. How did he do on blueberry buckle? Did he favor blueberry jam over strawberry preserve? Had he been known to sprinkle blueberries on his breakfast cereal, or was he strictly a bananas and cream sort of fellow? There were other questions of some moment. Was he a fast eater who slowed down, or a slow eater who started to speed up as things got serious, or just a good, steady, all-round trencher man? How many hot dogs could he put away while watching a Babe Ruth League game down at the St. Dom's baseball field? Was he much of a beer drinker? And if so, how many bottles did he usually put away in the course of an evening? Was he a belcher? It was believed that a good belcher was a bit tougher to beat over the long haul. All of this and other information was sifted, the odds laid, the bets made. How much money actually changed hands during the week or so following Pie Night, I have no way of knowing. But if you held a gun to my head and forced me to guess, I'd put it at close to $1,000. That probably sounds like a pretty paltry figure, but it was a lot of money to be passing around in such a small town 15 years ago. And because the contest was honest and a strict time limit of 10 minutes was observed, no one objected to a competitor betting on himself, and Bill Travis did so every year. Talk was, as he nodded, smiling to his audience on that summer night in 1960, that he had bet a substantial amount on himself again, and that the best he had been able to do this year was 1 for 5 odds. If you're not the betting type, let me explain it this way. He'd have to put $250 at risk to win $50. Not a good deal at all. But it was the price of success, and as he stood there soaking up the applause and smiling easy, he didn't look too worried about it. "And the defending champion," Mayor Charbonneau trumpeted, "Gretna's own Bill Travis." "Ooh, Bill! How many you going through tonight, Bill?" "You going for 10, Billy boy?" "I got a spot on you, Bill. Don't let me down, boy." "Save me one of those pies, Trav." Nodding and smiling with all proper modesty, Bill Travis allowed the mayor to tie his bib around his neck. Then he sat down at the far right end of the table, near the place where Mayor Charbonneau would stand during the contest. From right to left, then, the eaters were Bill Travis, David Lardass Hogan, Bob Cormier, Principal John Wiggins, and Calvin Spire holding down the stool on the far left. Mayor Charbonneau introduced Sylvia Dodge, who was even more of a contestant figure than Bill Travis himself. She had been president of the Gretna Ladies' Auxiliary for years beyond telling, since the first Manassas, according to some town wits, and it was she who oversaw the baking of each year's pies, strictly subjecting each to her own rigorous quality control, which included a weigh-in ceremony on Mr. Banachek's butcher's scales down at the Freedom Market, this to make sure that each pie weighed within an ounce of the others. Sylvia smiled regally down at the crowd, her blue hair twinkling under the hot glow of the light bulbs. She made a short speech about how glad she was that so much of the town had turned out to celebrate their hardy pioneer forebears, the people who made this country great, for it was great, not only on the grassroots level, where Mayor Charbonneau would be leading the local Republicans to the hallowed seats of town government again in November, but on the national level, where the team of Nixon and Lodge would take the torch of freedom from our great and beloved general and hold it high for— Calvin Spire's belly rumbled noisily. Going! There was laughter, and even some applause. Sylvia Dodge, who knew perfectly well that Calvin was both a Democrat and a Catholic, either would have been forgivable alone, but the two combined, never, managed to blush, smile, and look furious all at the same time. She cleared her throat and wound up with a ringing exhortation to every boy and girl in the audience, telling them to always hold the red, white, and blue high, both in their hands and in their hearts, and to remember that smoking was a dirty, evil habit which made you cough. The boys and girls in the audience, most of whom would be wearing peace medallions and smoking not Camels but marijuana in another 8 years, shuffled their feet and waited for the action to begin. "Let's talk more eatin'," someone in the back row called, and there was another burst of applause. It was heartier this time. Mayor Charbonneau handed Sylvia a stopwatch and a silver police whistle, which she would blow at the end of the 10 minutes of all-out pie-eating. Mayor Charbonneau would then step forward and hold up the hand of the winner. "Are you ready?" Hisener's voice rolled triumphantly through the great PA and off down Main Street. The 5 pie-eaters declared they were ready. "Are you set?" Hisener inquired further. The eaters growled that they were indeed set. Down street, a boy set off a rattling skein of firecrackers. Mayor Charbonneau raised one pudgy hand and then dropped it. "Go!" 5 heads dropped into 5 pie plates. The sound was like 5 large feet stamping firmly into mud. Wet chomping noises rose on the mild night air and then were blotted out as the betters and partisans in the crowd began to cheer on their favorites. And no more than the first pie had been demolished before most people realized that a possible upset was in the making. Lardass Hogan, a 7-to-1 underdog because of his age and inexperience, was eating like a boy possessed, his jaws machine-gunned up crust. The contest rules required that only the top crust of the pie be eaten, not the bottom, and when that had disappeared, a huge sucking sound issued from between his lips. It was like the sound of an industrial vacuum cleaner going to work. Moments later, his whole head disappeared into the pie plate. He raised it 15 seconds later to indicate he was done. His cheeks and forehead were smeared with blueberry juice, and he looked like an extra in a minstrel show. He was done. Done before the legendary Bill Travis had finished half of his first pie. Startled applause went up as the mayor examined Lardass's pie plate and pronounced it clean enough. He whipped a second pie into place before the pacemaker. Lardass had gobbled a regulation-sized pie in just 42 seconds. It was a contest record. He went at the second pie even more furiously yet, his head bobbing and smooching in the soft blueberry filling, and Bill Travis threw him a worried glance as he called for his second blueberry pie. As he told friends later, he felt he was in a real contest for the first time since 1957, when George Gamage gobbled 3 pies in 4 minutes and then fainted dead away. He had to wonder, he said, if he was up against a boy or a demon. He thought of the money he had riding on this and redoubled his efforts. But if Travis had redoubled, Lardass had trebled. Blueberries flew from his second pie dish, staining the tablecloth around him like a Jackson Pollock painting. There were blueberries in his hair, blueberries in his bib, blueberries standing out on his forehead as if, in an agony of concentration, he had actually begun to sweat blueberries. "Done!" he cried, lifting his head from his second pie dish before Bill Travis had even consumed the crust on his new pie. "Better slow down, boy," Isner murmured. Charbonneau himself had $10 riding on Bill Travis. "You gotta pace yourself if you want to hold out." It was as if Lardass hadn't heard. He tore into his third pie with lunatic speed, jaws moving with lightning rapidity. And then— But I must interrupt for a moment to tell you that there was an empty bottle in the medicine cabinet at Lardass Hogan's house. Earlier, that bottle had been 3/4 full of pearl-yellow castor oil, perhaps the most noxious fluid that the good Lord, in his infinite wisdom, ever allowed upon or beneath the face of the earth. Lardass had emptied that bottle himself, drinking every last drop and then licking the rim, his mouth twisting, his belly gagging sourly, his brain filled with thoughts of sweet revenge. And as he rapidly worked his way through his third pie, Calvin Spire, dead last as predicted, had not as yet finished his first. Lardass began to deliberately torture himself with grisly fantasies. He was not eating pies at all. He was eating cow flops. He was eating great big gobs of greasy, grimy gopher guts. He was eating diced-up woodchuck intestines with blueberry sauce poured over them. Rancid blueberry sauce. He finished his third pie and called for his fourth. Now 1 full pie ahead of the legendary Bill Travis. The fickle crowd, sensing a new and unexpected champ in the making, began to cheer him on lustily. But Lardass had no hope or intention of winning. He could not have continued at the pace he was currently setting if his own mother's life had been the prize. And besides, winning for him was losing. Revenge was the only blue ribbon he sought. His belly groaning with castor oil, his throat opening and closing sickly, he finished his fourth pie and called for his fifth, the ultimate pie. Blueberries become Electra, so to speak. He dropped his head into the dish, breaking the crust, and snuffled blueberries up his nose. Blueberries went down his shirt. The contents of his stomach seemed to suddenly gain weight. He chewed up pastry crust and swallowed it. He inhaled blueberries. And suddenly the moment of revenge was at hand. His stomach, loaded beyond endurance, revolted. It clenched like a strong hand encased in a slick rubber glove. His throat opened. Lardass raised his head. He grinned at Bill Travis with blue teeth. Puke rumbled up his throat like a 6-ton Peterbilt shooting through a tunnel. It roared out of his mouth in a huge blue and yellow glurt, warm and gaily steaming. It covered Bill Travis, who only had time to utter one nonsensical syllable. "Goog!" was what it sounded like. Women in the audience screamed. Calvin Spire, who had watched this unannounced event with a numb and surprised expression on his face, leaned conversationally over the table, as if to explain to the gaping audience just what was happening, and puked on the head of Marguerite Charbonneau, the mayor's wife. She screamed and backed away, pawing futilely at her hair, which was now covered with a mixture of crushed berries, baked beans, and partially digested frankfurters. The latter two had been Cal Spire's dinner. She turned to her good friend Maria Lavin and threw up on the front of Maria's buckskin jacket. In rapid succession, like a replay of the firecrackers, Bill Travis blew a great and seemingly supercharged jet of vomit out over the first 2 rows of spectators, his stunned face proclaiming to one and all, "Man, I just can't believe I'm doing this." Chuck Day, who had received a generous portion of Bill Travis's surprise gift, threw up on his hush-puppies and then blinked at them wonderingly, knowing full well that stuff would never come off suede. John Wiggins, principal of Gretna Elementary, opened his blue-lined mouth and said reprovingly, "Really, this has—" As befitted a man of his breeding and position, he did it in his own pie plate. Isner Charbonneau, who found himself suddenly presiding over what must have seemed more like a stomach flu hospital ward than a pie-eating contest, opened his mouth to call the whole thing off and upchucked all over the microphone. "Jesus, save us!" moaned Sylvia Dodge, and then her outraged supper, fried clams, coleslaw, butter and sugar corn, 2 ears' worth, and a generous helping of Muriel Harrington's Bosco chocolate cake, bolted out the emergency exit and landed with a large wet splash on the back of the mayor's Robert Hall suit coat. Lardass Hogan, now at the absolute apogee of his young life, beamed happily out over the audience. Puke was everywhere. People staggered around in drunken circles, holding their throats and making weak cawing noises. Somebody's pet Pekingese ran past the stage, yapping crazily, and a man wearing jeans and a Western-style silk shirt threw up on it, nearly drowning it. Mrs. Brockway, the Methodist minister's wife, made a long, basso, belching noise which was followed by a gusher of degenerated roast beef and mashed potatoes and apple cobbler. The cobbler looked as if it might have been quite good when it first went down. Jerry Malling, who had come to see his pet mechanic walk away with all the marbles again, decided to get the righteous fuck out of this madhouse. He got about 15 yards before tripping over a kid's little red wagon, and realizing he had landed in a puddle of warm bile, Jerry tossed his cookies in his own lap and told folks later he only thanked Providence he had been wearing his coveralls. And Miss Norman, who taught Latin and English fundamentals at the Gretna Consolidated High School, vomited into her own purse in an agony of propriety. Lardass Hogan watched it all, his large face calm and beaming, his stomach suddenly sweet and steady with a warm balm it might never know again. That balm was a feeling of utter and complete satisfaction. He stood up, took the slightly tacky microphone from the trembling hand of Mayor Charbonneau, and said, Chapter 17. I declare this contest a draw. Then he puts the mic down, walks off the back of the platform, and goes straight home. His mother's there, on account of she couldn't get a babysitter for Lardass's little sister, who was only 2. And as soon as he comes in, all covered with puke and pie drool, still wearing his bib, she says, Davy, did you win? But he doesn't say a fucking word, you know. Just goes upstairs to his room, locks the door, and lays down on his bed. I downed the last swallow in Chris's Coke and tossed it into the woods. Yeah, that's cool. Then what happened? Teddy asked eagerly. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Teddy asked. It means it's the end. When you don't know what happens next, that's the end. What? Vern cried. There was an upset, suspicious look on his face, like he thought maybe he'd just gotten rooked playing penny-up bingo at the Topsham Fair. What's all this happy crap? How'd it come out? You have to use your imagination, Chris said patiently. No, I ain't, Vern said angrily. He's supposed to use his imagination. He made up the fucking story. Yeah, what happened to the cat? Teddy persisted. Come on, Gordy, tell us. I think his dad was at the pie eat, and when he came home, he beat the living crap out of Lardass. Yeah, right, Chris said. I bet that's just what happened. And, I said, the kids went right on calling him Lardass, except that maybe some of them started calling him Puke Your Guts, too. That ending sucks, Teddy said sadly. That's why I didn't want to tell it. You could have made it so he shot his father and ran away and joined the Texas Rangers, Teddy said. How about that? Chris and I exchanged a glance. Chris raised one shoulder in a barely perceptible shrug. I guess so, I said. Hey, you got any new Ladeo stories, Gordy? Not just now. Maybe I'll think of some. I didn't want to upset Teddy, but I wasn't very interested in checking out what was happening in Ladeo either. Sorry you didn't go for this one better. Nah, it was good, Teddy said. Right up to the end. It was good. All that puking was really cool. Yeah, that was cool. Really gross, Vern agreed. But Teddy's right about the ending. It was sort of a jip. Yeah, I said, and sighed. Chris stood up. Let's do some walking, he said. It was still bright daylight, the sky a hot, steely blue, but our shadows had begun to trail out long. I remembered that as a kid, September days always seemed to end much too soon, catching me by surprise. It was as if something inside my heart expected it to always be June, with daylight lingering in the sky until almost 9:30. What time is it, Gordy? I looked at my watch and was astonished to see it was after 5. Yeah, let's go, Teddy said. But let's make camp before dark so we can see to get wood and stuff. I'm getting hungry, too. 6:30, Chris promised. Okay with you guys? It was. We started to walk again, using the cinders beside the tracks now. Soon the river was so far behind us we couldn't even hear its sound. Mosquitoes hummed, and I slapped one off my neck. Vern and Teddy were walking up ahead, working out some sort of complicated comic book trade. Chris was beside me, hands in his pockets, shirt slapping against his knees and thighs like an apron. I got some Winstons, he said. Hawked them off my old man's dresser. One apiece, for after supper. Yeah? That's boss. That's when a cigarette tastes best, Chris said. After supper. Right. We walked in silence for a while. That's a really fine story, Chris said suddenly. They're just a little too dumb to understand. No, it's not that hot. It's a mumbler. That's what you always say. Don't give me that bullshit you don't believe. Are you going to write it down, the story? Probably, but not for a while. I can't write him down right after I tell him. It'll keep. What Vern said about the ending being a jip? Yeah? Chris laughed. Life's a jip, you know it? I mean, look at us. Nah, we have a great time. Sure, Chris said. All the fucking time, you wet. I laughed. Chris did, too. They come out of you just like bubbles out of soda pop, he said after a while. What does? But I thought I knew what he meant. The stories. That really bugs me, man. It's like you could tell 1,000,000 stories and still only get the ones on top. You'll be a great writer someday, Gordy. Nah, I don't think so. Yeah, you will. Maybe you'll even write about us guys if you ever get hard up for material. Have to be pretty fucking hard up. I gave him the elbow. There was another period of silence, and then he asked suddenly, You ready for school? I shrugged. Whoever was. You got a little excited thinking about going back, seeing your friends. You were curious about your new teachers and what they would be like. Pretty young things just out of teachers' college that you could rag, or some old top kick that had been there since the Alamo. In a funny way, you could even get excited about the long, droning classes, because as the summer vacation neared its end, you sometimes got bored enough to believe you could learn something. But summer boredom was nothing like the school boredom that always set in by the end of the second week, and by the beginning of the third week you got down to the real business. Could you hit Stinky Fisk in the back of the head with your art gum while the teacher was putting the principal exports of South America on the board? How many good loud squeaks could you get off on the varnished surface of your desk if your hands were real sweaty? Who could cut the loudest farts in the locker room while changing up for phys ed? How many girls could you get to play Who Goosed the Moose during lunch hour? Higher learning, baby. Junior high, Chris said. And you know what, Gordy? By next June we'll all be quits. What are you talking about? Why would that happen? It's not going to be like grammar school, that's why. You'll be in the college course. Me and Teddy and Vern, we'll all be in the shop courses, playing pocket pool with the rest of the retards, making ashtrays and birdhouses. Vern might even have to go into remedial. You'll meet a lot of new guys, smart guys. That's just the way it works, Gordy. That's how they got it set up. Meet a lot of pussies is what you mean, I said. He gripped my arm. No, man, don't say that. Don't even think that. They'll get your stories. Not like Vern and Teddy. Fuck the stories. I'm not going in with a lot of pussies. No, sir. If you don't, then you're an asshole. What's asshole about wanting to be with your friends? He looked at me thoughtfully, as if deciding whether or not to tell me something. We had slowed down. Vern and Teddy had pulled almost half a mile ahead. The sun, lower now, came at us through the overlacing trees in broken, dusty shafts, turning everything gold. But it was a tawdry gold, dime store gold, if you can dig that. The tracks stretched ahead of us in the gloom that was just starting to gather. They seemed almost to twinkle. Star pricks of light stood out on them here and there, as if some nutty rich guy masquerading as a common laborer had decided to embed a diamond in the steel every 60 yards or so. It was still hot, The sweat rolled off us, slicking our bodies. "It's asshole if your friends can drag you down," Chris said finally. "I know about you and your folks. They don't give a shit about you. Your big brother was the one they cared about. Like my dad when Frank got thrown into the stockade in Portsmouth. That was when he started always being mad at us other kids and hitting us all the time. Your dad doesn't beat up on you, but maybe that's even worse. He's got you asleep. You could tell him you were enrolling in the fucking shop division, and you know what he'd do? He'd turn to the next page in his paper and say, 'Well, that's nice, Gordon. Go ask your mother what's for dinner. And don't try to tell me different. I've met him.' I didn't try to tell him different. It's scary to find out that someone else, even a friend, knows just how things are with you." "You're just a kid, Gordy." "Gee, thanks, Dad." "I wish to fuck I was your dad," he said angrily. "You wouldn't go around talking about taking those stupid shop courses if I was. It's like God gave you something, all those stories you make up. And he said, 'This is what we got for you, kid. Try not to lose it.' But kids lose everything unless somebody looks out for them, and if your folks are too fucked up to do it, then maybe I ought to." His face looked like he was expecting me to take a swing at him. It was set and unhappy in the green-gold late-afternoon light. He had broken the cardinal rule for kids in those days. You could say anything about another kid. You could rank him to the dogs and back, but you couldn't say a bad word ever about his mom and dad. That was the fabled automatic, the same way not inviting your Catholic friends home to dinner on Friday unless you checked first to make sure you weren't having meat was the fabled automatic. If a kid ranked out your mom and dad, you had to feed him a knuckle sandwich. "Those stories you tell, they're no good to anybody but you, Gordy. If you go along with us just because you don't want the gang to break up, you'll wind up just another grunt making C's to get on the teams. You'll get to high and take the same fucking shop courses and throw erasers and pull your meat along with the rest of the grunts. Get detentions, fucking suspensions. And after a while, all you'll care about is getting a car so you can take some skag to the Hops or down to the fucking Twin Bridges Tavern. Then you'll knock her up and spend the rest of your life in the mill or some fucking shoe shop in Auburn or maybe even up to Hillcrest plucking chickens. And that pie story'll never get written down. Nothing'll get written down, 'cause you'll just be another wise guy with shit for brains." Chris Chambers was 12 when he said all that to me, but while he was saying it, his face was crumpled and folded into something older, oldest, ageless. He spoke tonelessly, colorlessly, but nevertheless what he said struck terror into my bowels. It was as if he had lived that whole life already, that life where they tell you to step right up and spin the wheel of fortune, and it spins so pretty, and the guy steps on a pedal and it comes up double zeros, house number, everybody loses. They give you a free pass and then turn on the rain machine. Pretty funny, huh? A joke even Vern Tessio could appreciate. He grabbed my naked arm and his fingers closed tight. They dug grooves in my flesh. They grounded the bones. His eyes were hooded and dead. So dead, man, that he might just have fallen out of his own coffin. "I know what people think of my family in this town. I know what they think of me and what they expect. Nobody even asked me if I took the milk money that time. I just got a 3-day vacation." "Did you take it?" I asked. I'd never asked him before, and if you had told me I ever would, I would have called you crazy. The words came out in a little dry bullet. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I took it." He was silent for a moment, looking ahead at Teddy and Vern. "You knew I took it. Teddy knew. Everybody knew. Even Vern knew, I think." I started to deny it and then closed my mouth. He was right. No matter what I might have said to my mother and father about how a person was supposed to be innocent until proved guilty, I had known. "Then maybe I was sorry and tried to give it back," Chris said. I stared at him, my eyes widening. "You tried to give it back?" "Maybe," I said. "Just maybe. And maybe I took it to old Lady Simmons and told her. And maybe the money was all there and I got a 3-day vacation anyway because the money never showed up. And maybe the next week old Lady Simmons had this brand new skirt on when she came to school." I stared at Chris, speechless with horror. He smiled at me, but it was a crimped, terrible smile that never touched his eyes. "Just maybe," he said. But I remembered the new skirt, a light brown paisley, sort of full. I remembered thinking that it made old Lady Simmons look younger, almost pretty. "Chris, how much was that milk money?" "Almost $7. "Christ," I whispered. "So I just say that I stole the milk money, but then old Lady Simmons stole it from me. Just suppose. Then suppose I told that story. Me, Chris Chambers, kid brother of Frank Chambers and Eyeball Chambers. You think anybody would have believed it?" "No way," I whispered. "Jesus Christ." He smiled his wintry, awful smile. "And do you think that bitch would have dared try something like that if it had been one of those douchebags from up on the View that had taken the money?" "No," I said. "Yeah. If it had been one of them, Simmons would have said, 'Kay, we'll forget it this time, but we're going to spank your wrist real hard, and if you ever do it again, we'll have to spank both wrists.' But me, well, maybe she had her eye on that skirt for a long time. Anyway, she saw her chance, and she took it. I was the stupid one for even trying to give that money back. But I never thought that a teacher— Oh, who gives a fuck anyway? Why am I even talking about it?" He swiped an arm angrily across his eyes, and I realized he was almost crying. "Chris," I said, "why don't you go into the college courses? You're smart enough." "They decide all of that in the office, and in their smart little conferences. The teachers, they sit around in this big circle jerk, and all they say is, 'Yeah, right.' All they give a fuck about is whether you behaved yourself in grammar school and what the town thinks of your family. All they're deciding is whether or not you'll contaminate all those precious college course douchebags. But maybe I'll try to work myself up. I don't know if I could do it, but I might try, because I want to get out of Castle Rock and go to college and never see my old man or any of my brothers again. I want to go someplace where nobody knows me, and I don't have any black marks against me before I start. But I don't know if I can do it." "Why not?" People drag you down." "Who?" I asked, thinking he must mean the teachers, or adult monsters like Miss Simmons who had wanted a new skirt, or maybe his brother Eyeball who hung around with Ace and Billy and Charlie and the rest, or maybe his own mom and dad. But he said, "Your friends drag you down, Gordy. Don't you know that?" He pointed at Vern and Teddy, who were standing and waiting for us to catch up. They were laughing about something. In fact, Vern was just about busting a gut. "Your friends do. They're like drowning guys that are holding onto your legs. You can't save them. You can only drown with them." "Come on, you fucking slowpokes," Vern shouted, still laughing. "Yeah, coming," Chris called, and before I could say anything else, he began to run. I ran too, but he caught up to them before I could catch up to him. Chapter 18. We went another mile and then decided to camp for the night. There was still some daylight left, but nobody really wanted to use it. We were pooped from the scene at the dump and from our scare on the train trestle, but it was more than that. We were in Harlow now, in the woods. Somewhere up ahead was a dead kid, probably mangled and covered with flies. Maggots, too, by this time. Nobody wanted to get too close to him with the night coming on. I had read somewhere, in an Algernon Blackwood story, I think, that a guy's ghost hangs out around his dead body until that body is given a decent Christian burial, and there was no way I wanted to wake up in the night and confront the glowing, disembodied ghost of Ray Brower, moaning and gibbering and floating among the dark and rustling pines. By stopping here, we figured there had to be at least 10 miles between us and him, and of course all 4 of us knew there were no such things as ghosts. But 10 miles seemed just about far enough in case what everybody knew was wrong. Vern, Chris, and Teddy gathered wood and got a modest little campfire going on a bed of cinders. Chris scraped a bare patch all around the fire. The woods were powder dry, and he didn't want to take any chances. While they were doing that, I sharpened some sticks and made what my brother Denny used to call pioneer drumsticks, lumps of hamburger pushed into the ends of green branches. The 3 of them laughed and bickered over their woodcraft, which was almost nil, There was a Castle Rock Boy Scout troop, but most of the kids who hung around our vacant lot considered it to be an organization made up mostly of pussies, arguing about whether it was better to cook over flames or over coals. A moot point. We were too hungry to wait for coals. Whether dried moss would work as kindling, what they would do if they used up all the matches before they got the fire to stay lit. Teddy claimed he could make a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together. Chris claimed he was so full of shit he squeaked. They didn't have to try. Vern got the small pile of twigs and dry moss to catch from the second match. The day was perfectly still, and there was no wind to puff out the light. We all took turns feeding the thin flames until they began to grow stouter on wrist-thick chunks of wood fetched from an old deadfall some 30 yards into the forest. When the flames began to die back a little bit, I stuck the sticks holding the pioneer drumsticks firmly into the ground at an angle over the fire. We sat around watching them as they shimmered and dripped and finally began to brown. Our stomachs made pre-dinner conversation. Unable to wait until they were really cooked, we each took one of them, stuck it in a roll, and yanked the hot stick out of the center. They were charred outside, raw inside, and totally delicious. We wolfed them down and wiped the grease from our mouths with our bare arms. Chris opened his pack and took out a tin Band-Aids box. The pistol was way at the bottom of his pack, and because he hadn't told Vern and Teddy, I guessed it was to be our secret. He opened it and gave each of us a battered Winston. We lit them with flaming twigs from the fire and then leaned back, men of the world, watching the cigarette smoke drift away into the soft twilight. None of us inhaled because we might cough, and that would mean a day or two of ragging from the others. And it was pleasant enough just to drag and blow, hawking into the fire to hear the sizzle. That was the summer I learned how you can pick out someone who's just learning to smoke. If you're new at it, you spit a lot. We were feeling good. We smoked the Winstons down to the filters, then tossed them into the fire. "Nothing like a smoke after a meal," Teddy said. "Fucking A," Vern agreed. Crickets had started to hum in the green gloom. I looked up at the lane of sky visible through the railroad cut and saw that the blue was now bruising towards purple. Seeing that outrider of twilight made me feel sad and calm at the same time, brave, but not really brave, comfortably lonely. We tramped down a flat place in the underbrush beside the embankment and laid out our bedrolls. Then, for an hour or so, we fed the fire and talked, the kind of talk you can never quite remember once you get past 15 and discover girls. We talked about who was the best dragger in Castle Rock, if Boston could maybe stay out of the cellar this year, and about the summer just past. Teddy told about the time he had been at White's Beach in Brunswick, and some kid had hit his head while diving off the float and almost drowned. We discussed at some length the relative merits of the teachers we had had. We agreed that Mr. Brooks was the biggest pussy in Castle Rock Elementary. He would just about cry if you sassed him back. On the other hand, there was Mrs. Cody, pronounced Cody. She was just about the meanest bitch God had ever set down on the earth. Vern said he'd heard she hit a kid so hard 2 years ago that the kid almost went blind. I looked at Chris, wondering if he would say anything about Miss Simmons, but he didn't say anything at all, and he didn't see me looking at him. He was looking at Vern and nodding soberly at Vern's story. We didn't talk about Ray Brower as the dark grew down, but I was thinking about him. There's something horrible and fascinating about the way dark comes to the woods. It's coming unsoftened by headlights or streetlights or house lights or neon. It comes with no mothers' voices calling for their kids to leave off and come on in now to herald it. If you're used to the town, the coming of the dark in the woods seems more like a natural disaster than a natural phenomenon. It rises like the Castle River rises in the spring. And as I thought about the body of Ray Brower in this light, or lack of it, what I felt was not queasiness or fear that he would suddenly appear before us, a green and gibbering banshee whose purpose was to drive us back the way we had come before we could disturb its peace, but a sudden and unexpected wash of pity that he should be so alone and so defenseless in the dark that was now coming over our side of the earth. If something wanted to eat on him, it would. His mother wasn't here to stop that from happening, and neither was his father, nor Jesus Christ in the company of all the saints. He was dead, and he was all alone, flung off the railroad tracks and into the ditch, and I realized that if I didn't stop thinking about it, I was going to cry. So I told a Lidio story, made up on the spot and not very good, And when it ended, as most of my Lidio stories did, with one lone American dog-face coughing out a dying declaration of patriotism and love for the girl back home into the sad and wise face of the platoon sergeant, it was not the white, scared face of some PFC from Castle Rock or White River Junction I saw in my mind's eye, but the face of a much younger boy, already dead, his eyes closed, his features troubled, a rill of blood running from the left corner of his mouth to his jawline. And in back of him, instead of the shattered shops and churches of my Lidio dreamscape, I saw only dark forest and the cindered railway bed bulking against the starry sky like a prehistoric burial mound. Chapter 19. I came awake in the middle of the night, disorientated, wondering why it was so chilly in my bedroom and who had left the windows open. Denny, maybe. I had been dreaming of Denny. Something about body surfing at Harrison State Park. But it had been 4 years ago that we had done that. This wasn't my room. This was someplace else. Somebody was holding me in a mighty bear hug. Somebody else was pressed against my back, and a shadowy third was crouched beside me, head cocked in a listening attitude. "What the fuck?" I asked in honest puzzlement. A long drawn-out groan in answer. It sounded like Vern. That brought things into focus, and I remembered where I was. But what was everybody doing awake in the middle of the night? Or had I only been asleep for seconds? No, that couldn't be, because a thin sliver of moon was floating dead center in an inky sky. "Don't let it get me," Vern gibbered. "I swear I'll be a good boy. I won't do nothing bad. I'll put the ring up before I take a piss. I'll—" With some astonishment, I realized that I was listening to a prayer, or at least the Vern Tessio equivalent of a prayer. I sat bolt upright, scared. "Chris?" "Shut up, Vern," Chris said. He was the one crouching and listening. "It's nothing." "Oh, yes, it is," Teddy said ominously. "It's something." "What is it?" I asked. I was still sleepy and disorientated, unstrung from my place in space and time. It scared me that I had come in late on whatever had developed, too late to defend myself properly, maybe. Then, as if to answer my question, a long and hollow scream rose languidly from the woods. It was the sort of scream you might expect from a woman dying in extreme agony and extreme fear. "Oh, dear to Jesus!" Vern whimpered, his voice high and filled with tears. He reapplied the bear hug that had wakened me, making it hard for me to breathe and adding to my own terror. I threw him loose with an effort, but he scrambled right back beside me like a puppy which can't think of any place else to go. "It's that Brower kid," Teddy whispered hoarsely. "His ghost out walking in the woods." "Oh, God!" Vern screamed, apparently not crazy about that idea at all. "I promise I won't hog no more dirty books out of Dolly's Market. I promise I won't give my carrots to the dog no more. I... He floundered there, wanting to bribe God with everything but unable to think of anything really good in the extremity of his fear. "I won't smoke no more unfiltered cigarettes. I won't say no bad swears. I won't put my bazooka in the offering plate. I won't—" "Shut up, Vern," Chris said, and beneath his usual authoritative toughness I could hear the hollow boom of awe. I wondered if his arms and back and belly were as stiff with gooseflesh as my own were, and if the hair on the nape of his neck was trying to stand up in hackles as mine was. Vern's voice dropped to a whisper as he continued to expand the reforms he planned to institute if God would only let him live through this night. "It's a bird, isn't it?" I asked Chris. "No, at least I don't think so. I think it's a wildcat. My dad says they scream bloody murder when they're getting ready to mate. Sounds like a woman, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said. My voice hitched in the middle of the word, and 2 ice cubes broke off in the gap. "But no woman could scream that loud," Chris said, and then added helplessly, "Could she, Gordy?" "It's his ghost," Teddy whispered again. His eyeglasses reflected the moonlight in weak, somehow dreamy smears. "I'm going to go look for it." I don't think he was serious, but we took no chances. When he started to get up, Chris and I hauled him back down. Perhaps we were too rough with him, but our muscles had been turned to cables with fear. "Let me up, fuckheads!" Teddy hissed, struggling. "If I say I want to go look for it, then I'm going to go look for it. I want to see it. I want to see the ghost. I want to see it." The wild, sobbing cry rose into the night again, cutting the air like a knife with a crystal blade, freezing us with our hands on Teddy. If he'd been a flag, we would have looked like that picture of the Marines claiming Iwo Jima. The scream climbed with a crazy ease through octave after octave, finally reaching a glassy, freezing edge. It hung there for a moment and then whirled back down again, disappearing into an impossible bass register that buzzed like a monstrous honeybee. This was followed by a burst of what sounded like mad laughter, and then there was silence again. "Jesus H. bald-headed Christ," Teddy whispered, and he talked no more of going into the woods to see what was making that screaming noise. All four of us huddled up together, and I thought of running. I doubt if I was the only one. If we'd been tenting in Vern's Field, where our folks thought we were, we probably would have run. But Castle Rock was too far, and the thought of trying to run across that trestle in the dark made my blood freeze. Running deeper into Harlow and closer to the corpse of Ray Brower was equally unthinkable. We were stuck. If there was a hand out there in the woods, what my dad called a goosalum, and it wanted us, it would probably get us. Chris proposed we keep a guard, and everyone was agreeable to that. We flipped for watches, and Vern got the first one. I got the last. Vern sat up cross-legged by the husk of the campfire while the rest of us lay down again. We huddled together like sheep. I was positive that sleep would be impossible, but I did sleep, a light, uneasy sleep that skimmed through unconsciousness like a sub with its periscope up. My half-sleeping dreams were populated with wild cries that might have been real or might only have been products of my imagination. I saw, or thought I saw, something white and shapeless steal through the trees like a grotesquely ambulatory bedsheet. At last I slipped into something I knew was a dream. Chris and I were swimming at White's Beach, a gravel pit in Brunswick that had been turned into a miniature lake when the gravel diggers struck water. It was where Teddy had seen the kid hit his head and almost drown. In my dream, we were out over our heads, stroking lazily along with a hot July sun blazing down. From behind us, on the float, came cries and shouts and yells of laughter as kids climbed and dived or climbed and were pushed. I could hear the empty kerosene drums that held the float up, clanging and booming together. A sound not unlike that of church bells, which are so solemn and emptily profound. On the sand and gravel beach, oiled bodies lay face down on blankets. Little kids with buckets squatted on the verge of the water or sat happily flipping muck into their hair with plastic shovels, and teenagers clustered in grinning groups, watching the young girls promenade endlessly back and forth in pairs and trios, never alone, the secret places of their bodies wrapped in Janssen tank suits. People walked up the hot sand on the balls of their feet, wincing, to the snack bar. They came back with chips, devil dogs, Red Ball popsicles. Mrs. Cody drifted past us on an inflatable rubber raft. She was lying on her back, dressed in her typical September to June school uniform, a gray two-piece suit with a thick sweater instead of a blouse under the jacket, a flower pinned over one almost non-existent breast, thick support hose the color of Canada mints on her legs. Her black old lady's high-heeled shoes were trailing in the water, making small V's. Her hair was blue-rinsed, like my mother's, and done up in those tight, medicinal-smelling clock-spring curls. Her glasses flashed brutally in the sun. "Watch your steps, boys," she said. "Watch your steps, or I'll hit you hard enough to strike you blind. I can do that. I have been given that power by the school board. Now, Mr. Chambers, mending wall, if you please. By rote." "I tried to give the money back," Chris said. "Old Lady Simmons said okay, but she took it. Do you hear me? She took it. Now what are you going to do about it? Are you going to whack her blind?" "Mending wall, Mr. Chambers, if you please. By rote." Chris threw me a despairing glance, as if to say, "Didn't I tell you it would be this way?" and then began to tread water. He began, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it," and then his head went under. his reciting mouth filling with water. He popped back up, crying, "Help me, Gordy! Help me!" Then he was dragged under again. Looking into the clear water, I could see two bloated, naked corpses holding his ankles. One was Vern and the other was Teddy, and their open eyes were as blank and pupilless as the eyes of Greek statues. Their small prepubescent penises floated limply up from their distended bellies like albino strands of kelp. Chris's head broke water again. He held one hand up limply to me and voiced a screaming, womanish cry that rose and rose, ululating in the hot, sunny summer air. I looked wildly towards the beach, but nobody had heard. The lifeguard, his bronzed athletic body lolling attractively on the seat at the top of his whitewashed cruciform wooden tower, just went on smiling